When I was in high school, there was always an officer around campus named Bradley. He was there every day. I assumed to protect and ensure safety, but I just remember him catching kids for cutting class. Now, I understand we all have our own personal biases when it comes to the police, but I never questioned if it was necessary for him to be at my school. I mean, cops are all over the place. I'm just used to them being around. However, after the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black people by the police, there's been national attention looking at policing and police violence, and that attention has also spread to schools. Recently, many school districts around the country, Denver, Minneapolis, Portland, Oakland, and San Francisco, have severed ties with their local police departments, with more considering or voting on it. With increased awareness of police presence in our society, many are asking, should police be in schools? Today, it's pretty common for schools to have a security presence. 57% of public schools have some form of security staff, but not all security is the same. There's security guards, there's law enforcement, and then there are school resource officers, or SROs. They basically work in partnerships with schools. They're usually hired by a local police department, sheriff's agency, or school system. They're cops, so they can arrest people and carry weapons, but their main job is to keep the school safe. The big problem is that their training varies widely across the country. Nationally, there are no specific training requirements for the job, although the National Association of School Resource Officers, or NASRO, recommends that officers complete a 40-hour course that includes emergency plans for schools, de-escalation techniques, and academic work, including studying the adolescent brain. This is in addition to the nearly 700 hours you need to become a police officer. So how did SROs end up in schools in the first place? Let's take a look back. They first popped up in Flint, Michigan in 1953 as a way to strengthen relationships between youth and local law enforcement. But through the 1950s, there were less than 100 officers on school campuses nationwide. Fast forward to the war on drugs in the 1980s and 90s, when there was a big increase in juvenile arrests linked to selling and using drugs. The number of officers in schools grew as tough on crime federal and state policies were passed, most notably the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, also known as the Crime Bill. Then came the Columbine tragedy and a wave of other school shootings. Following Sandy Hook in 2012 and a wave of people freaking out about school safety, the Obama administration gave funding to 263 cities and counties of more than $125 million, including nearly $45 million to fund new school resource officer positions. Now, there's no official count of officers as schools don't have to report that info, but NASRO estimates that between 14,000 and 20,000 SROs are currently in service nationwide. Now, not everyone is stoked to have cops in schools. Organizers around the country have been fighting to remove them for years. Some people say that having police in schools doesn't really help stop crimes and can end up criminalizing students for behavior that officers aren't trained to deal with effectively. They also argue that having cops on and around campuses makes schools feel more like jail or prison.
Specifically, when we talk to our young folks, our Black and brown young folks from East Oakland, they feel that they are harassed and they are not in a position of power to speak up when they have these situations with SROs.
That's Christina Flores, a young organizer from Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, or COURAGE, based in East Oakland.
For me, from my personal experience with SROs and law enforcement being on school campus, I've always felt really paranoid and scared. And I felt like I was always constantly being watched, so I couldn't mess up. Why is our constant or like our direct response is always calling like SROs and law enforcement? Anything you do, if you mess up, even if you don't mess up, if they think it's wrong, then it's wrong and you're kind of just targeted.
Another downside of police in schools is that they tend to target Black students. Take a look at the data. Black students make up 15% of school enrollment nationwide, but 33% of arrests. Compare that to white students who account for 50% of enrollment and 34% of arrests. SROs have also been accused of using excessive force or otherwise responding inappropriately to incidents involving young students. And that contributes to what is called the school-to-prison pipeline, which is when kids, especially those from historically underserved groups, are unfairly singled out, punished, and pushed out of school and into the juvenile justice system.
When we push out young folks and, those young folks then don't have time in school and their grades go down and they're most likely to commit a crime. And there's a saying where it's like, if you treat people like criminals, they're most likely then to believe that they are.
Advocates want to take the money that funds the police and put it towards funding the resources that aren't cops. That includes restorative justice, counselors, therapists, nurses, and other support staff who can address safety concerns and conflicts. But that's not some magic cure-all. Critics also argue that these kinds of staff might not have the training on how to handle certain extreme situations, like if a kid brings a gun or drugs to school, or if an adult comes on campus with drugs or a weapon. When something like that goes down, you're gonna need a cop, so why not have that cop be an SRO who has special training to deal with students?
These are very specialized positions. So when you, as a department and a school district, are selecting an officer to do this job, you got to be really thoughtful in that. And we've established best practices for how you go about selecting that person.
That's Mo Kennedy, Executive Director of the National Association of School Resource Officers.
If you've got an SRO, I'll use myself as an example, who knows how to function in the school environment, has relationships with students and educators, and we have a disorderly conduct, or we have a shove-in match or a harassment going on, the majority of the time, I'm gonna say, you know what? If you guys can handle this, I really don't want to make an arrest, right? And that's the way an SRO typically is going to handle that. If you remove the SRO from the equation, now you're calling 911 or you're calling dispatch, and you're getting a patrol deputy or a patrol officer come to the school to solve your problem. How many more times do you think that's going to end in an arrest for disorderly conduct?
But like I said before, there's no national standard for how these officers are hired and trained, so results may vary with how they handle situations in schools. And it's also unclear if SROs actually do make schools safer. Juvenile arrests have gone down since the mid-90s, but you can't say definitively that that's the result of SROs. They might have played a role, but there are a lot of other variables. Crime all across America in general has been plummeting since around the same time. Now, regardless of whether SROs are or are not in schools, you're still left with a big problem: bias that harms Black and brown students when incidents do occur.
You may have cut 7 police officers from my school district, but you didn't stop the interaction or the criminalization of Black people by police officers.
That's Jamoke Hinton Hodge. She's been an Oakland Unified School District school board member for 12 years, who recently voted no on removing cops from campuses in Oakland schools.
When you rethink how a school site officer can play a role as a culture keeper, understand what's happening for a young person academically, socially, mentally, spiritually, you then still have this system where over 50% of the teaching staff and even the support staff, even those nurses, even those restorative justice people, even your social workers are like non-Black folk that are being asked to engage with our young people, and whether or not their implicit bias has been checked in any kind of way, right? What does their training look like?
She's not alone. Specialized anti-bias and de-escalation training is a huge concern for many. That training needs to be implemented for all school staff who get involved in disciplining students. So there you have it. Just to recap, the data around cops in schools keeping students safe is inconclusive. The racial disparities in arrest and where those officers are disproportionately affect Black and brown students. And advocates suggest reallocating funds and resources to services to better support students. While those in favor of SROs suggest well-trained officers can prevent serious crimes on campus, and simply removing police from campuses doesn't remove policing from schools. Lastly, the other support staff that's being suggested may not be equipped to handle more serious issues like guns, drugs, or an adult on campus. But now we want to hear from you. Do you want to see an alternative to police on campuses? If so, what would it look like? Let us know in the comments below. As always, I'm your host, Miles Best. Till next time, peace out.